So unlike in other subjects in the world like sport, technology, even music to an extent, the deeper you go into these subjects, the closer you go to the end of these things, there's an advancement. It gets more complex, more advanced, more difficult to be able to reach the next step. And in spirituality, in awakening, it's completely reversed. It's completely a paradox of the deeper you go, as I've said before, the simpler it gets. And this is not easy. This is so simple that this is what I found difficult. This is what a lot of people found difficult, is the realization that the practices, the techniques, the agendas to get somewhere, all these little things we were doing to rearrange basically the illusion, were getting in the way of the simple fact that really the will, the desire needs to be surrendered. The realization, in the end, the only real thing you can do is listen. I've only ever been able to describe it as agendaless listening. I can't think of another name that encapsulates what this surrender is. And I ask myself, why is it that this is the only thing that at this moment resonates? I mean, the inquiries are still there. It's still interesting to look into self. It's still interesting to look into the emotions, the shadow works. But eventually the equilibrium comes and it's like, well, what's here? And any time this inquiry to be able to feel more enlightened, or the emotional, it's almost as if Adia's quote comes in nicely here, where this is you going along your spiritual journey and this is the ceiling of what you can do. And you may sometimes bump up against this, sometimes maybe you can't will your way to enlightenment, the frustrations there. Maybe you lose a loved one, these helplessness feelings. The worst thing I think I've ever felt, if we put our body mind back on where the preference is, was never really fear. It was never so much anger. It was the complete and utter helplessness, the complete seeing of no way out. That was always what scared and terrified this body mind. Sometimes it was a helplessness with people dying. Sometimes it's a helplessness of trying to control a relationship to be able to keep the love going. Sometimes it's just helplessness that you can't do anything unless it's done through you, not by you. And this helplessness was seen to be able to show the humility that one needs to deepen the layer, the subtler layers of self, to let these dissolve, the layers of self that are rooted in the will, the illusion that you have will. And so maybe these things, some people hit it pretty early on. The awakening is usually like here, the little bypass, but it doesn't quite touch the ceiling of the will. But very slowly you'll start to realize, and this happened to me a few months after awakening. So to get quite personal with this, to provide context, I was the biggest lover of inquiry of anyone, probably. I would take this to bed with me. I would take it to my delivery job. I would take inquiry. I would sit for hours a day, hours just doing it with a very deep down knowing that one day would have to be let go of to an extent, or the agendas with it would have to be let go of. But what inquiry did to me was, one, showed me I could not find myself anywhere. Two, it exhausted me to the point of seeing that it needed to be exhausted, basically, in my body mind anyway, to be able to be let go of. And these two things showed me inquiry and surrender to an extent that I was able to look into something. But then eventually awakening occurred, just a mist descending. I've never said it was a certain day. I just slowly started to realize I couldn't find myself anywhere. I was unlocatable. I'd never made progress. I'd never been born, and I was never going to die. It was these realizations. And you'd think that would be very liberating. You'd think that'd be it. But just because an aspect of me had woken up, an aspect of my deathless reality, didn't mean that I still behaved in that way. It didn't mean I still thought in that way. And it didn't mean that the way I moved out in the world was like that way. And all these residual resistances were rooted in the deeper, subtler senses of self. And so I found myself still suffering with the will, because I could think, if I inquire into this, and I see it in the radical non-dual community side as well, because I was coming up the mountain this way, and they were sneaking up the mountain this way through the radical approach, and they're both needed. But once you get to this certain level where you're both at, where not even the radical message works at this stage, not even the inquiry message works at this stage, you're kind of in this no man's land. It's a no man's land of stillness. And the stillness has to find you. The surrender at this point has to find you. Because we're bumping up against what the message is allowing. We see that we really can't now. Any time before, when I was in the awakening phase, I'd feel suffering, I'd inquire into the one that suffers, the suffering would drop away. But now the suffering was in the illusion of the will. And now the only thing that worked, because I was so exhausted, I couldn't get anywhere else, I couldn't deepen this insight, was to completely let go. And this is endless, this is a refinement. Maybe I have to hold my hands up because I've said it multiple times, but let me make this a lot more clear. That for me, this is an ongoing letting go, a kind of free fall that I've never found a ground for. I am full of admiration and humility. I know nothing, and that's where I think the peace is found. I can't sit here and say I know something that will set you free. All I can say is where the freedom isn't. It's not in getting your way. It's not in having a will. It's not in inquiring to enlightenment. It's not even in enlightenment. It's the giving up of all of this. It is all coming towards this end. We're all going down a plug hole like this until we're all into this place right here, which knows deep down this whole time, all that was required was a letting go. You can say a letting go of the identity, you can say a letting go of control, but really I find the subtlest senses of even identity are just wrapped around control. Maybe validation, control, security. And this is where agendarless listening comes in. You can't even do agendarless listening, it kind of does find you, because you know there's no way out. You know when someone's premature to this because they use surrender as a way to get somewhere. But surrender really is the dying. It is the giving up of everything. But it takes a balance, it takes you to lean in with your heart. Otherwise this becomes another practice. So lean in, listen without any kind of agenda, any kind of preference for that moment. And it does deepen.